So we'll go now to related subject, frequent questions on this situation. We look to Rosh, chapter 25, verse 6. Use the Bible. This is reference to the influence of Avraham Avinu. It's on page 26,
47.
the bottom of the page, 26.
26. No. Page.
We know that Avraham Avinu,
This is chapter. That's what
he was
Okay.
the teacher of mankind. That is still basically regarded by not only Am Yisrael, but also Christians, the Muslims. And there's one aspect of Avraham Avinu which is mysterious. And which we find also in general literature. I suppose those who study ancient culture know about Sanskrit and the Brahmins, as they were called. And in fact, I'll go a bit deeper in this, that all of us know the fantastic exposition of Torah of the Shamshon Fuel Hirsch, a very deep thinker, and one of the most brilliant exponents of the Tanakh, Chumash, and of Jewish mitzvahs. And he had basically two teachers. One was my great-grandfather, Boruch, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Germany at the highest level in his time, and his disciples included Yerushalayim, and my grandfather was his basic disciple, Talmud Muha. He's one of the major teachers also of the Boruch. In fact, he gave smicha to Rabbi. But his other teacher was a very unusual genius who in his time did not want to accept the title rabbi because he thought it was compromised by the reformers. Therefore he preferred to call him Chacham Bernai. He was the rabbi of Hamburg. And he was the most brilliant scholar, and Rav Hirsch quotes him quite a few times. And to him is attributed also a certain work which has where there's an exposition of Eastern religions. What the early Eastern religions, the Brahmins, contain many deep moral teachings. And if you look carefully in the Midrashim, it would appear that the name Brahmins comes from Avraham Avinu. And where is it mentioned in the Chumash? In the verses I just quoted. But it says in chapter 25, Avraham Avinu, after they say a description of, very interesting description, which goes up to the marriage between Yitzchak and Rivka, who were following the paths of Avraham Avinu and also Sarah Imenu. And then it says Avraham took a wife and her name was Keturah. So whether Keturah, some say it was a remarriage with Hava, and others wish with another. Right. And the nations which are described here are Middle Eastern and Far Eastern groups. But then it says in verse 6, Vayitain Abraham et kol shalom liYitzchak. Abraham gave everything that he had to Yitzchak, who was to be the one who would continue the true traditions of being the progenitor of the people of Hashem, who should be a kingdom of priests and bring blessing to all the families of the earth. But the co-wives of Abraham, who also had children, and some say that includes also Keturah. So it says, Abraham gave them matanot, he gave them presents. By Shalchem, he sent them away. As long as he was living, he would not want any connection between these other children, descendants of Abraham, and Yitzchak his son. And therefore, he sent these Lepi Lakshim together with certain presents to the more eastern lands. And this is then afterwards a description of the remainder of the lives of Avraham Avinu that describes his funeral of buried Marat Rachpelah. So this cryptic verse about the Far Eastern groups, to whom Abraham sent them presents. What were those presents? So that's the subject now of this second passage here, in the middle of the page 461, which you've got in front of you. So what is the deeper significance of this? According to the description of our sages, the oral tradition, it says, what presents did he give them? They became separated from true holiness. True holiness remained with Yitzchak, who continued the true Brit Avraham. But these others, Nitztarful Umut Haolam, these other descendants of Avraham Avinu, through his Bilachim, they joined the nations of the world. אבל אין ספק שניצוצי קדוש הרבים זרק אברהם אבינו עליו השלום בישמעאל ובני קטורה. It's no doubt that sparks of holiness, many of them, Avraham threw them to Ishmael and the sons of Keturah and these descendants. V'chein Yitzchak v'Esau. Same place Yitzchak also, that there were still sparks of holiness that went to Esau. Without that, there would have been no existence for them at all. So this is a deeper concept which is connected to what we discussed before, namely that some human beings, they indeed belong to the potential of the highest Kedusha. We live entirely and try hard to live with Tzelem Elokim. And these exist primarily amongst Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael represents the human conscience, the development of the human conscience, the divine image. And Torah B'nai Noach, which was preserved by Shem Ve'eva to some extent. And then, through the enormous development of faith through Avraham Avinu, so sparks of this faith also went over to the other physical descendants of Avraham Avinu. And I mention this because it's most likely, from all the evidence that exists, that the Brahmins, they took their sparks of holiness from Avraham Avinu. And that's why we find certain common factors in the true morality of the Noachide Code. And the Noachide Code should not be considered to be just 7. Because even if you develop the true details of the Noachide Code, as they are found in Jewish tradition, they contain approximately 7 mitzvot, if we compare to the type of mitzvot that apply to Am Yisrael. And this you'll find analyzed in more detail both in my early articles in the magazines and so the Noachide Code, where I bring the sources for this, but even more so in the more recent elaboration of the Noachide Code, produced by Rav Wiener, also in English, called the Divine Code, where it goes into great detail and demonstrates the great power of the Noachide Code when it's kept completely. Now, amongst the nations of the world, the early traditions also reflect certain aspects of the Noachide Code that became distorted into mingled with idolatry. In the Sanskrit versions, it's more pure still, and they're called the Brahmins. It's the influence of Avraham Avinu. And this is the concept of the purpose of the human species is to live b'tselem Elokim, the image of Hashem. And this purpose became forgotten by the nations, but it can be restored to some extent by Avraham Avinu, also amongst the nations of the world. And there we find in Ishmael and their descendants, the Bnei Keturah also in the descendants of Esau, although they left the covenant, were not willing to accept it, but sparks of holiness still existed. And that gave them the power to go on existing in this world. So the way Rav Dessler here describes it in these few words is that some human beings fulfill their own potential of Tzelem Elokim and reach a high level. And as we explained, those are given constant divine providence. There are others, even amongst the descendants of Yitzchak and Yaakov, who are Rishayim and are not interested. They suppress their spiritual nature and they follow materialism, and some who even, we know, they deny the true existence of the constant God of providence, like Spinoza, for example, called a Jewish philosopher, but in many ways he was a Jew who left Judaism to a great extent and was also a great philosopher. So that's why we can't count him with, although in certain ways he was filled with a concept of the way in which the world is filled with the power of God, but still in his concept of Deus Sive Natura, which means he recognized the divine power of nature, the immanence of God in the world, but he was not so ready to accept what we call the transcendental aspect of God. Although Shem Elokim, yes, Shem Havaya, no. Shem Havaya represents that God is above time, space, and causality in the human mind, and he is entirely in charge of every moment of existence, whilst Spinoza, following a bit Aristotelianism as well, he developed the concept and became a powerful influence amongst German philosophy also, that nature indeed is a divine power, but it's this concept of the immanence of God, what is termed in Jewish tradition, Hashem is Mamalek Kol Almin, he fills all the worlds, but it's also Sovev Kol Almin, it's also transcendental and beyond all the worlds. So the second aspect is the specific concept of constant supervision and providence. So it's true that Rishayim, this is the whole concept developed here, wicked people who don't want to recognize the power of Hashem, they find other ways of explaining things, but they're not on the highest level. But such a Kedusha still remain with them. In other words, through them, there's certain aspects of truth intermingled with falsehood, and because these aspects of truth, they have, as it were, a zechut kiyum, a right to continue to exist. So you say it like this: in which way? From a national angle, from a universal angle, that these other groups are needed in order that the people of Israel should continue to become a kingdom, priest, and holy nation. All at tzad shlili, it can be in a negative fashion. That they should be a staff of chastisement for the people of Israel when it's necessary. Liyot Israel Yeshivat Musa le'et hatzorah. So from the negative angle, we know, unfortunately, this is, if you look through the prophets, the divine roots of anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitic powers were given specifically to those who are in a certain way closest to the people of Israel, namely Esau and Ishmael. Where do we find anti-Semitism being powerful and being extreme and completely irrational? Amongst Esau and Ishmael until today. There were times you could say, well, these are things are fanciful, got certain imagination, what would happen in the future. But with us it isn't. It is the interpretation of history. And if we tend to forget it, Hashem reminds us of it. Why is there why do we have today the combination of the Bnei Ishmael, culturally speaking, accepting the concept that Ishmael, as it were, has replaced Yitzchak, or also the Western anti-Semitism, where they think that the great power of the Aryan nations is the one that denies the conscience and denies the Jewish people and wants to destroy each one of them. In other words, the type of decrees of Haman. Where do we find these? You find that if you go back to the origin, it's all interrelated with those who are closest to us, because they're the ones who hate us most. But why is it sent to us? It's sent to us Yeshivat Musa, but not only those nations, others as well. Because if you look in this important verse, it's Zephaniah, chapter 3, verse 6 to 7. So let's look at the find in the Jewish Bible. Zephaniah. One of the 12 prophets. And behind him, have you found him already? Zephaniah.
707.
Yes, 100. See which page exactly. Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is 709. Look here at verse 709. So it says verse 6. Hashem says, I have cut off the nations, Yechrati Goyim, Nashama Pinotam, I've made the cornerstones of the cities desolate. Echarafti Chutzutam, I've caused the streets to become ruins. Vibli Over, Litz Orehem. Their cities were cut off without anybody being left there. Vibli Ish. All human population has been destroyed. Me'en Yosef. There's nobody living there anymore. And we experienced at the time of the tsunamis, for example. Omati, I said, Achtili Oti. Speaking of people of Israel, I said, you should have awe in front of you. Tikhu Musa. Take from this event ethical instruction, so that the dwelling of mankind will not be cut off, in all that I promised them. But Instead of that, they rose up in the morning to go create destruction with all their deeds. But to whom is the Musa applied? To the people of Israel. In view of this, I'll just tell you, I know that the Horovitz in Radin, who always wanted to find out what's going on in the world, and when he was told, I think at the time of the Japanese wars, that many people were killed, that all things had happened, he said, well, the Gemara says already, from here we learn out if catastrophes come upon the nations of the world, the more in Yevamos, it only comes primarily to teach you, the Jewish people, because those who are not part of the Jewish people, they don't have an awareness of divine providence. But you, the Jews, have been elected to be aware that God is the ruler of the world, and He sometimes brings about terrible punishments on different parts of mankind, for the purpose that you, the Jewish people, should learn your lesson. So we say, well, punishments. So he brings here this statement, it says, Yevamos, in Yevamos it says, Mikan she'en rabba l'umat ha'olam ela b'shvil Yisrael. And so one of the purposes, a negative purpose you could say, when troubles occur, Hashem is saying to the people of Israel, you've got to learn Musa. And Horovitz Chaim used to say like this, today we don't have prophets to give us Musa, but we have world events to give us Musa. If you look at what the prophets said, and nearly all the prophets in their time, they discussed the position of Israel, especially the land of Israel, in relationship to all the other nations. And it was connected to two different ways. And especially it says the passage also at the end of Amos, which says, you think you Jews are different to all the other nations? Yes, you are. I punish you more than all the others. Why do I punish you more than all the others? Because the words of Amos. Only you have I known. With you I've had this personal relationship, and therefore it has an impact upon how I treat you. It's because of your higher position and your higher challenge you have to face that I bring more punishment on you than the others. When I bring punishment on the others, it's also intended for you, that's negatively. But he also mentioned with Desler, it can also be the tzad ha'chiyuvi. It can all be positive. Shilmudu Yisrael al-Kapam. That whatever happens to the nations can be a teaching for us, which goes a bit deeper because the Rav Dessler develops this a great deal. He says, when we see extreme evil qualities amongst the nations of the world for which they're punished, then it reflects to some extent that in those very qualities we are ourselves failing. In other words, we see today the terrible, murderous instincts, the way in which, in the name of the true one God, they go and kill people with great enthusiasm and passion. And they're collecting people from all over the world. And this shows us the destruction of the divine image amongst the nations. So we should also take a note. Let's see, the sages say that Tirtzach does not only include actual murder. We've got to go further. And also, the sages say anyone who puts his fellow man to shame in public is like a Roseach. So, we've got to think to ourselves, are we really fulfilling something it's called in English assassination of a person's personality. You can assassinate a person directly or indirectly. There are many people who, because they're treated with great slander, people commit suicide because of it. It means it's also because they feel their life here is being ruined by all the slander that goes on, the character murder that goes on, murder of a person's character. And at some it's become also a political sport, or it's become a sport to retain a high position. So they start attacking one another in murderous ways. So we have to put right. Lo tirtzach according to our madrega. There's a lot to learn, both from the evils of Esav and the evils of Yisrael. On the other hand, some of them, they go the other direction. Baruch Hashem. There are some Muslims, and some also Christians, who, they've got false ideas which, generally speaking, are not their own ideas, but being a tradition for them for many generations, and therefore they accept it without much questioning. But they really try to do good in the world. They would never perform such evil deeds. And really this is the battle today, the battle for the soul of the human race, and maybe even for the survival of the human race is going on today. So it's a very important situation when this we see around us. And it's got a great deal to do with the spreading of the teaching of Avraham Avinu, who always went, even when he gave these shameless, was going that further, the next paragraph, he gave certain ideas of spiritual wisdom to this, not only in a physical sense, but spiritual sense, the Far East. That's why some of the Far Eastern religions, indeed, they try to follow the Melechite code on the code of their understanding on a high level. And they are the ones also who are the moderates, as they're called, who say that the distortions we see today of Christianity or Islam are very evil and very total. So let us hope that we will keep alive the high level of the brit which Avraham Avinu made with Yitzchak and Yaakov and Israel. So what time for one question?
The Brahmin today, if they're in India, that would mostly Pakistan, India. That's
yes, the origin.
So does it mean that there are other religions that they could remain pretty much the same and be considered Noahide faiths?
There's what?
There are other religions on earth that they could be considered as Noahide faiths.
As what?
Noahide faiths,
Yes.
as kosher for non-Jews.
Yes. Although the Rambam says a pure Noachide on the highest level is really someone who bases it on the revelation given to Moshe Rabbeinu, which some of them do. If you go to the concept of international relations, to introduce morality on an international scale, was introduced in the time of the Renaissance by the great masters, who all of them studied. They studied not just the Tanakh, but they started studying the Gemara and the Rambam. And amongst these was John Selden and Selby, and they're the founders of the concept of international relations after it's developed into the League of Nations Charter, the United Nations Charter. And that continues, this is the moral, those who still believe in morality amongst the nations. Today we know the United Nations have representatives of some of the extreme murderous groups as well. They've got a very thin line. Also the so-called Court of International Justice in The Hague, one of the major situations. So, you know, they're the sort that gave the Nobel Prize to Arafat, who said we need 1 million shahidim, people, suicide bombers, the development, to go and just take Yerushalayim by force. That was his policy. That's what he said to his people. On the outside, he got through representation. Today it's coming through in the United Nations. Observer of Hasidim. He is a partner with Hamas, and Hamas just don't mind killing innocent people and even making innocent people into shields. That they should protect terrorists who want to make attacks. This is certainly a very criminal act. So all these questions are very much relevant today.